Okay, so you're someone who likes to get right to the heart of big societal issues, right? But without like getting lost in a million articles and reports. Well, today we're going to try and do just that.
We're going deep on a really big one, the growing challenges that young men are facing today.
That's right.
And we're not just talking anecdotally here.
Yeah.
We've got some great material to work with today.
Yeah, for sure.
So we have this new report from the UK, from the Center for Social Justice,
Right.
called Lost Boys, and it just came out in March 2025.
Okay.
And we've also got this really fascinating discussion that we listened to on the show called The Diary of a CEO,
Yeah, that one's always interesting.
featuring a behavioral scientist and dating coach, and also with some data from Hinge.
Right, yeah. So we have like a really kind of an interesting mix of like qualitative and quantitative data
Okay.
to work with here.
Exactly.
And so our goal today is not just to sort of throw stats at you,
Right.
but to really look at the data and try and understand the why behind what we're seeing.
Wow.
And see if we can't sort of like suss out some key insights and maybe even offer some potential solutions.
Yeah, because when you look at the data and some of the personal stories
Yeah.
contained within these sources, it really is quite shocking.
Yeah.
There's a real sense of a genuine emerging crisis that we need to be talking about.
Okay, so let's start unpacking this. And both the Lost Boys report and the Diary of a CEO discussion highlighted a pretty worrying trend in the educational and economic landscape.
Absolutely.
And so the Hinge data expert on that show, he pointed to a significant 40% increase in males aged 16 to 24 not in education or employment,
Wow.
which is a huge...
Yeah, that's a huge chunk of young men who are just totally disconnected.
Disconnected, yeah.
Yeah. And, you know, if we connect this to the bigger picture,
Yeah.
the Diary of a CEO discussion also touched upon what they called a reverse gender gap,
Yeah, I've heard about this.
where young women, particularly those under 30 in urban areas,
Right?
are now out-earning young men. And they show this fascinating graph that really illustrates this shift.
Which on the surface, you're like, yeah, go girls.
Exactly.
Right, we're all for female financial success.
Right.
But the behavioral scientists on the show raised this really important question.
Yeah.
And the question is this: are boys being left behind?
Yeah. Are they lacking the skills and the opportunities to thrive in this new landscape?
Exactly. Yeah.
And what I find fascinating is that what's valued has changed so much.
Yeah, for sure.
We've seen a decline in this traditional vocational training,
Right.
like auto mechanics or woodworking.
Yeah, like shop class.
Exactly. Shop class used to be a viable career path for so many young men.
Right.
And those fields have largely been replaced with computer science. And while that's important,
Yeah.
it might not be the right fit for maybe 2/3 of males who don't pursue a traditional liberal arts degree.
Yeah. So are we.
So it's like, are we providing enough pathways to economic success for all young men?
That's the question.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so it's not just about the job market.
Right.
The data expert also highlighted some really striking stats
Yeah.
within the education system.
Okay.
Apparently, 70% of valedictorians in the U.S. are female.
Wow.
And women are more likely to be in like the top 10% of their class.
So what does this tell us about learning styles or engagement for boys?
Right. Like, are boys not thriving
Right.
in this environment as well?
And it raises a question about whether our co-ed model actually serves all the needs
Of boys.
of boys. Yeah.
Yeah.
And we even heard this anecdote from an anonymous teacher who talked about this increase in disruptive behavior in young boys. And it could be linked to a lack of boundaries at home
Right.
or unsupervised access to the internet or pornography.
Oh, yeah.
You know, and these things could be distorting their understanding of what's acceptable behavior.
Oh, wow.
So again, are there alternative educational approaches that would better support boys?
Yeah. Yeah. And this leads us to another massive factor highlighted by both of our sources.
Right.
And that is fatherlessness. And so the data expert cited some figures from the National Fatherhood Initiative,
Okay.
which is an American organization.
Okay.
And they said that 25% of young boys in the U.S.
Wow.
live without a biological step or adoptive father.
That's a lot.
It's a lot. And the U.S. apparently has the highest rate of children in single-parent households globally.
Wow. I didn't realize it was that high.
It's 92% with the mother alone,
Wow.
which is a big shift from like 1968,
Right.
when it was just 11%. And that was up to 21% in 2020.
So it's like a huge shift in family structure.
Huge.
Yeah.
And if we connect this directly to the Lost Boys report,
Yeah.
they point to some pretty concerning correlations
I'll
with
see.
with the absence of a father figure.
Okay.
And they say this is linked to negative outcomes for young men,
Like what?
including a higher likelihood of being involved in drug and gun-related activities,
Oh, wow.
dealing drugs and mental health issues.
That's serious.
Yeah. And the behavioral scientist on Diary of a CEO brought up this good point, though, right?
Yeah.
That, like, father absence isn't always like a simple case of a guy just abandoning his kids.
Right.
Right? Sometimes there are challenges within the family court system.
Yeah.
And also, as kids get older,
Right.
maybe a non-resident parent just sort of like misses out on those everyday moments.
Yeah, like the informal just hanging out.
Yeah, and it's like death by a thousand cuts, right?
Exactly. And that can really, affect that bond.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so all of this then leads us to think about the emotional and social challenges
Yes.
that young men might be grappling with.
Okay.
And the behavioral scientist shared this really sobering statistic.
Okay.
He said the suicide rate among sexually abused boys is disproportionately higher
Oh, wow.
than for girls.
Yeah, it's almost like boys maybe lack some of the coping mechanisms.
Yeah, or they have different ones, right, that
Yep.
aren't as effective.
Right. And maybe they're not as resilient emotionally.
Yeah. And then there's a whole stigma around men talking about their struggles.
Oh, absolutely.
And seeking help, right?
Yeah.
Like, even someone like Lewis Howes just recently came out and talked about
Right.
his own experience.
Yeah, and he's such a successful
Yeah.
figure, like role model for so many.
Right.
And he's only just coming out with this now.
Yeah. So,
Yeah.
like, if he felt like he couldn't talk about it.
Right, exactly. Like how many other men are out there
Right.
who have experienced something similar but just feel like they can't talk about it?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then going back to the anonymous teacher,
Yeah.
the fact that she's observing all this disruptive behavior in boys,
Yeah.
it's like, well, are we even educating them the right way?
Right, considering their developmental needs.
Right.
Yeah.
And there's this interesting idea that came up on the show
Oh, what was that?
about possibly delaying formal education
Okay.
for boys, or at least incorporating
Interesting.
more hands-on practical play into their learning.
Yeah, because they were saying that, single-sex boys'
Yeah.
schools
Yeah.
often have like double the recess time.
Wow.
And there's probably a reason for that, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And what's really interesting is that for a long time, even acknowledging the important role of fathers in boys' lives
Right.
was considered taboo.
Yeah. It was like controversial.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the behavior scientists made this great point
What was that?
that, like, boys at a certain point, they might just tune their mothers out
Oh, yeah.
and need like a different kind of presence.
A male presence.
Yeah.
To set boundaries.
Yeah.
And like show them the way.
Right. And this lack of consistent male involvement in their lives,
Yeah.
whether it's at home or at school with fewer male teachers,
Harder male teachers for sure.
or in after-school programs, or just in the community. It's
Yeah.
like we've created this situation where for some boys, like, a prison guard is their first
Yeah.
real
It's awful.
male role model.
It's awful, but it's true.
Yeah, and it's scary, right?
Yeah.
So it's clear that these aren't just isolated problems, as the Lost Boys report said.
Yeah.
This is all symptomatic of this deeper issue.
Of boys growing up without sufficient guidance, discipline, and a sense of purpose.
Exactly. And this has to be connected to the broader societal and economic shifts
Absolutely.
we're experiencing, right?
Yeah, for sure.
And the data expert on Diary of a CEO argued that our current economic policies and the emphasis on a 4-year college degree
Right.
as like the main path to success,
The only ban.
yeah, disproportionately benefit a very small segment of the population.
Like the super class of 1%.
Yeah, exactly. And this leaves all the unremarkable individuals,
Yeah, quote unquote.
yeah, with fewer opportunities for upward mobility.
Yeah. And I thought it was so interesting when they compared
Yeah.
UCLA's acceptance rate from back in the day,
I know.
which was 76% to what it is now, which is 9%.
Yeah.
It's insane.
It is insane. Okay, so this winner takes all dynamic then
Yeah.
seems to be impacting all facets of society.
Yeah, tell me more.
So the data expert pointed to widening disparities in health outcomes,
Oh, wow.
the decline in marriage rates.
Yeah. Marriage is becoming a luxury good.
Yeah,
It's like only the wealthy can afford to get married,
especially men.
especially men. Yeah.
Right.
And then there are just fewer babies being born.
That's right.
It's all connected.
Yeah. Yeah. So this brings us to the whole dating crisis.
Yes, the dating apocalypse.
And the evolving dynamics between the genders.
Yes.
Um, and the behavioral scientists on the show talked about this growing mating gap,
Yes.
where highly educated, successful women are increasingly finding a lack of male partners who they perceive as being on their level.
Right, because hypergamy,
Yeah.
which is the tendency for women to seek partners of equal or...
Of equal or higher status is being amplified by all of these changes.
Totally.
Yeah, so as women achieve greater success, the pool of men who meet their expectations may be shrinking.
Yeah. And he also said, women's expectations in dating have evolved.
How so?
He said, emotional intelligence is now like a key factor
Oh, that's interesting.
in what women are looking for.
Okay.
Whereas men were maybe raised with this more traditional... provider mindset.
Interesting.
And maybe haven't developed these softer skills
Yeah.
to the same extent.
Right.
But we have to be nuanced about the pay gap, right?
Okay, tell me more.
Because while the data experts said that, young women in urban areas are earning more,
Right.
that often shifts when they become mothers.
Right.
And there's this valid concern that if women are the greater economic contributors,
Right.
there needs to be a shift in men's contribution to the household and childcare.
Absolutely.
And a lot of women are like, hey,
This isn't happening.
this isn't happening.
Right.
And then there's this thing called the high heels effect,
Oh, yeah, what's that?
where a lot of women prefer taller men.
Okay.
And so if you're on a dating app and you put in a height filter,
Right.
you're immediately eliminating a large portion of the male
A
population.
large portion, yeah.
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 And then you've got this thing called Porsche polygamy,
Oh, tell me about that one.
where a small percentage of like highly desirable men,
Right, the top 1%.
have so many options
Right.
that it disincentivizes them.
From settling down.
From pursuing a long-term monogamous relationship.
Yeah. And meanwhile, like, the other guys are just completely shut out.
Yeah, they don't even get a look in.
Yeah.
And then, of course, the rise of online dating itself
Right.
is a major factor.
In all of this.
Yeah.
Okay.
And the behavioral scientists suggested that women's experiences online might be inflating their expectations.
Oh, interesting, because they're maybe hooking up with
Yeah.
these, like, high-status guys.
Right. And then it's like, well, now that's my new baseline for
Yeah.
everyone.
Makes sense.
And the data experts said that on these dating apps, there's a tendency for all the women.
To want the same few guys.
Yeah.
And they had this statistic that the average man on Tinder
Yeah.
needs something like 1,000 swipes
1,000.
to get one coffee date.
Oh, my God.
Yeah.
So the majority of men are just getting rejected constantly.
Yeah.
Yeah. And this is all happening at a time when traditional markers of success
Right.
are less attainable, right? So like home
I don't
ownership,
want the job.
a stable career,
Yeah.
all of these things are less attainable for young men today.
Yeah.
And this constant rejection leads to men opting out.
Right.
And we see that reflected in the neat statistics, the guys who are not in education, employment, or training.
Exactly.
And so they turn to online validation.
For things like porn.
Yeah, through
Yeah.
Reddit communities or these red-pilled communities.
Right.
And then figures like Andrew Tate emerge, who unfortunately can become problematic father figures for some young men.
Right. And there's this scary statistic that a man who hasn't lived with or married someone by 30 has like a 1 in 3 chance of substance abuse. And the data expert asked this question.
What was that?
Where can men demonstrate a sense of excellence
Right.
or value
Yeah.
in a society that has like fewer and fewer avenues for that?
Right, because it used to be like college, the office,
Yeah.
church, or temple.
Yeah.
Now it's like, where do you go?
And so we're seeing this political polarization too.
Yeah, totally.
Between the genders, with women on average being more liberal and men more conservative.
And, we see this reflected in like church attendance now.
Right.
It's the first time in history that there are more men than women attending church.
Yeah. It's fascinating.
It really is.
And the behavioral scientists talked about these key dating paradoxes
Oh, yes. Tell me about these.
that really highlight the challenges.
Yep.
The first paradox is this. Women are increasingly economic providers,
Yes.
but they still desire emotional support from men who maybe haven't been raised.
Or give it permission
Yeah, to offer that.
to offer that. Yeah.
The second paradox is that there's this call for men to be more open and vulnerable.
Yes.
But then when they actually do that, there's this,
discomfort.
societal discomfort.
Like, oh, a woman would rather see me die on the white horse then fall off.
Yeah.
It's like this expectation to always project strength.
Yeah. And the third paradox
Yes.
is that women say they want men to take the lead.
Yeah, to lead an approach.
Yeah. But then there's this increased fear
Right.
of, being called out.
Right, or publicly shamed
Yeah.
in the Me Too era.
Right.
Yeah, and then, of course, there's dater shaming online,
Oh, yeah.
where these negative experiences are just broadcast for everyone to see.
Totally.
Yeah, so it's a minefield for men.
So where do we go from here?
Yeah, what are solutions?
The behavioral scientists said that we need to create a new definition of masculinity.
I like that.
One that encompasses both strength and provision,
Yes.
but also emotional intelligence.
Yes, that balance is so important.
Right. And he talked about the idea of men's groups.
Oh, yeah, those are interesting.
As like a possible solution.
Yeah.
And they talked about this one magician
Okay.
who had created this men's group, and it was really structured.
Oh, how so?
So like everyone gets Post-it notes, and there's this focused discussion, and there's accountability.
I see.
Yeah.
And I thought it was interesting that they said that sometimes men in these groups need to work on being less funny
I know.
so that they can have deeper conversations.
It's so true.
Yeah.
And they also acknowledge that women do a lot of heavy lifting.
Yeah, a lot of emotional labor.
Yeah, in relationships.
Yeah, they're basically raising men in some ways.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we have to talk about the elephant in the room,
With that.
corn.
Yeah.
They talked about how it's got this massive...
It's like a huge percentage of internet traffic.
Yeah.
It's crazy.
And how it can negatively influence perceptions of relationships and diminish the desire for real connection.
And the motivation to actually go out and develop those social skills.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But we are seeing the rise of these no-fap communities.
Oh, yeah?
Which suggests that people are starting to become aware of this.
Yeah, the potential harm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then there's AI.
Right.
Sex robots.
It's like, what happens when you can just get your needs met?
Yeah. Will people even bother?
With real relationships.
Right.
Yeah, that's a scary thought.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so how about some advice for young men specifically?
Okay. Okay.
So Scott said that they need to recognize their capital of time.
Yeah.
And reinvest it in things like physical fitness.
Okay.
Strength training in particular.
Strength is a fundamental aspect of masculinity.
Right. Making money.
Yeah.
Getting a financial plan.
Okay.
And practicing kindness.
I like that.
Logan built on that by saying, cultivate your passions.
Okay.
Adopt a growth mindset.
Right.
And prioritize effort in your relationship.
Oh, yeah, like remembering details.
Yeah.
Planning thoughtful dates.
Yeah. And he said men can be better than 90% of the competition.
Just by doing the basic things well.
Just by doing the basics.
I love that.
Right. And he had this great analogy of clothing in the closet.
Tell me about that.
Instead of creating a checklist of what you want in a partner.
Right.
He said, look at the clothes in your own closet.
Yeah.
Are you the kind of person
that someone would want?
That someone would actually want.
Yeah, I love that.
Right.
It puts the onus on you.
On you, yeah.
Yeah.
And they talked about the struggles of successful women in dating as well, right?
They face their own challenges.
They do.
Yeah.
And they talked about how some men are intimidated by successful women.
Of course.
And some women are just choosing to become single mothers by choice.
Right.
And then polyamory is becoming more prevalent.
It really is, yeah.
And so they touched upon the role of feminism.
Yeah.
Recognizing the good, but also acknowledging maybe some unintended consequences.
Right, like the pressure on women to have it all.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And Scott had a more traditional perspective.
Right.
He said economic viability is still important.
Especially in a capitalist system.
Yeah, he said provider, protector, procreator.
The 3 Ps.
And it's so sad that they shared this statistic.
What was that?
That words like worthless and useless appear often in suicide notes.
Oh, my goodness.
Of young men.
Yeah, so their economic struggles are tied to their sense of identity and self-worth.
Yeah, and Scott said that he wants to create this dating boot camp.
Oh, tell me about this.
To help men.
Okay.
And the modules are developing a sense of humor.
Okay.
Building confidence through posture.
Okay.
Male manners.
I like that.
Going to the gym, making money, entrepreneurship, and conflict resolution.
Wow, that's a whole curriculum.
It is.
Yeah.
And he talked about what he calls the 3 legs of the stool of masculinity.
Okay, what are those?
Being a provider.
Okay.
So that's having discipline and a plan.
Okay.
Being a protector.
So that's good manners and defending the vulnerable.
I like that.
And being a procreator.
So wanting relationships and family.
Yes.
Yeah.
And the fact that procreation now needs to be taught is...
Sign of a sick society.
Yeah, and the birth rates are declining everywhere.
I know, particularly in South Korea.
Yeah, and in
Yeah.
the U.S.
Yeah, it's worrying.
And there was this idea that young men are becoming more conservative.
Yeah, because they feel like there's no positive masculine vision from the left.
Right.
Yeah.
So what's the advice for parents?
Yeah.
Well, they said forgive yourself
Oh, yeah.
for any past mistakes.
Okay.
Actively involve male role models in your sons' lives.
Yeah.
And they shared this story about a mom who was told
What was that?
that her son needs to be more successful than she was,
Oh, wow.
which highlights this need for, like, unwavering parental support.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And they talked about this interesting concept of surplus value
Okay.
as, like, a measure of manhood. So, like, you're creating more tax revenue than you absorb.
Yeah.
Interesting.
And then we have to address the whole issue of men and vulnerability
Yeah.
and suicide, right?
Right.
Men are much more likely to commit suicide.
Yes, and they often don't seek help.
Right. And so they talked about how, men have this fear of being emasculated
Right.
if they express their emotions
And yet emotional intelligence is so crucial
for well-being.
for everyone's well-being, regardless of whether it's going to help you get a date or not.
And they told this story about Kumail Nanjiani
Oh, yeah.
learning to recognize his emotions.
Yeah, that was really powerful.
And the good news is that there are more and more resources
Yes.
for men now.
Specifically for men, yeah.
Yeah.
That's great.
And Scott recommended this online therapy platform called BetterHelp.
Okay.
And then Logan said this great thing.
What was that?
He said, women don't have to do worse for men to do better.
I love that.
We need to raise everyone up.
Yes, exactly.
And Scott had this great analogy of the arc of happiness,
Oh, can you tell me about this?
which acknowledges that the years between 18 and 45 are especially tough.
They are.
And he talked about the need for self-forgiveness and seeking help.
Yeah.
And he said, just because you haven't achieved mega fame or wealth
Doesn't mean you're a failure.
doesn't mean you're a failure.
Yeah.
And he talked about how he felt this sense of shame after his son was born because he was struggling financially.
Yeah, that's so relatable.
Yeah.
And I loved Logan's suggestion to read fiction,
Oh, yeah.
build empathy.
Yeah, especially to understand women.
Yeah, because, men tend to focus on nonfiction.
Right, business and self-improvement.
Exactly.
And he talked about how reading John Irving novels
Oh, yeah.
helped him feel a sense of normalcy.
That's great.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So as you can see, this issue is incredibly complex.
Absolutely.
And we've only just scratched the surface here.
But hopefully you've gotten some valuable insights.
Really?
And you've connected some dots.
Yeah, and understanding all of this is crucial,
Yeah.
not just for young men, but for the health of our society as a whole.
Absolutely.
So here's a question for you to ponder.
Okay.
Given everything we've talked about today,
Yeah.
the economic shifts, the changing roles of men and women, the impact of technology,
Right.
the decline of traditional social structures,
Yeah.
what single shift do you think
Mhm.
would have the most positive impact on the lives of young men today?
That's a good question.
Yeah, so we encourage you to keep thinking about these issues.
Yes.
Talk to your friends.
Yes. Have those conversations.
Yeah, and thanks for joining us for this deep dive.
Yes. Thank you.